Lorraine Banks believed books were bridges, bridges to other worlds, other minds, other cultures. With that spirit, she'd installed a charming, hand-painted little free library on a post at the edge of her front yard in the manicured but intellectually arid neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates. She'd stocked it with a thoughtful collection, classic novels, acclaimed contemporary fiction, beautifully illustrated children's books celebrating diversity, even some poetry. It was a small beacon of shared knowledge and joy. It lasted less than a day. She was arranging a fresh batch of books, including a signed first edition of a beloved children's author, when Mr. Stephen Prentice, the HOA president, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a sneer of disapproval, marched up to her, flanked by two equally grim-faced HOA board members. "What is this monstrosity?" Prentice demanded, jabbing a finger at her little free library. "This isn't some inner-city flea market, Ms. Banks. This is Willow Creek Estates. We have aesthetic standards. This book junk is an eyesore and a violation." "Good morning, Mr. Prentice," Lorraine replied, her voice calm despite the aggressive intrusion. "This is a little free library. It's a community book exchange. Many neighborhoods embrace them." "Embrace them," Prentice scoffed. "We embrace order, conformity, and high property values, not cultural trash and potential propaganda outlets cluttering our pristine sidewalks. This thing and its contents must be removed immediately." Before Lorraine could even protest further, one of Prentice's associates, a thuggish man named Gary, stepped forward with a can of lighter fluid and a lighter. In a horrifying, swift movement, he doused a stack of books Lorraine had just placed on the top shelf, and with a flick of the lighter, set them ablaze. "No!" Lorraine screamed, lunging forward, but Gary shoved her back. She watched in disbelief and agony as the flames consumed the books. A collection of Maya Angelou's poetry, a beloved Toni Morrison novel, a children's story about empathy. The acrid smell of burning paper and ink filled the air. It was a visceral, hateful act of destruction. "That's what we think of your cultural trash, Ms. Banks," Prentice declared, a triumphant, ugly smirk on his face as the flames licked higher. "Consider this your first and only warning. Get rid of this entire shrine to ignorance, or the next fire might be bigger." He then raised a megaphone. "Attention, Willow Creek Estates," his amplified voice boomed. "Your HOA has taken decisive action against the offensive and potentially subversive materials being distributed on Sycamore Lane. We will not tolerate the spread of unapproved literature or the activities of uneducated agitators in our community. This is a neighborhood of decent, hardworking people, not a haven for intellectual deviants." Uneducated agitator? Intellectual deviant? Lorraine, a woman who held multiple advanced degrees, who had chaired national literacy campaigns, felt a cold, furious rage mixed with the sickening grief of watching books burn. Neighbors, drawn by the smoke and Prentice's harangue, began to gather. Some looked shocked, a few even horrified, but many, cowed by Prentice or sharing his narrow worldview, began to echo his sentiments. "Her books are kind of weird, aren't they?" one woman whispered loudly to her companion. "I saw one with a very ethnic cover." "Stephen's absolutely right," another man shouted, emboldened. "Burn it all down. We don't need that kind of filth in our neighborhood, probably teaching kids all sorts of nonsense." Several then began to throw pieces of trash from their own pockets and nearby bins onto Lorraine's lawn and at the still smoldering Little Free Library. "This is an outrage." Lorraine finally found her voice, trembling not with fear, but with righteous anger. "You have destroyed private property. You have incited hatred. Those were books, Mr. Prentice. Books, symbols of knowledge, of freedom of thought." "Symbols of trash, more like," Prentice retorted, clearly enjoying the confrontation and the support from his mob. He had his associate, who had set the fire, now filming everything with a smartphone. "And we have it all on camera, Miss Banks. Your defiance, your bizarre attachment to this garbage. We'll make sure the whole world sees what kind of person you really are." He then produced a pre-printed official HOA violation notice. And speaking of defiance, this is a formal citation. For erecting an unauthorized structure for distributing unapproved and potentially hazardous materials, referring to the books, and for creating a public nuisance and fire hazard. You are hereby fined $15,000, payable immediately. And if this entire eyesore isn't gone by tomorrow morning, the fines will double daily, and we will initiate legal proceedings to have you declared a menace and removed from this community. $15,000 for a little free library, for sharing books, for being apparently the wrong kind of person in Stephen Prentice's perfect, sterile world. He was not just destroying books. He was trying to destroy her spirit, her voice. The video, as promised, appeared on the HOA's website and local social media groups within the hour. It was titled, Willow Creek HOA Battles Radical Agitator and Her Offensive Book Stash. It was a masterpiece of manipulative editing, showing close-ups of the burning books, implying Lorraine was somehow responsible, her anguished face, and Prentice's heroic pronouncements about protecting community values. The comments section was a predictable firestorm of racist, anti-intellectual, and threatening messages, all fanning the flames of hatred Prentice had so gleefully ignited. Lorraine Banks, best-selling author, PEN America board member, and a lifelong champion of literacy and free expression, stood amidst the charred remains of her small offering of knowledge, her heart aching with a grief that went far beyond the loss of mere paper and ink. This was an assault on everything she believed in. But as she looked at the smoldering embers, a different kind of fire began to burn within her, the cold, unyielding fire of justice. Stephen Prentice thought he had won a battle against cultural trash. He had no idea he had just declared war on the entire world of literature, and on a woman whose words had the power to move nations. His chapter in this story, she vowed, would be a very short, very ignominious one. The charred remains of her little free library and the ashes of burned books were a daily, sickening reminder to Lorraine Banks of the battle she was now embroiled in. The $15,000 fine notice from Stephen Prentice and the Willow Creek Estates HOA was not just an extortion attempt. It was a declaration of war on her values, her profession, and her very presence in their meticulously curated, intellectually barren neighborhood. Her first act was not to despair, but to engage. She sent a formal, icily polite letter via her attorneys, a prestigious New York firm renowned for defending First Amendment rights and representing literary giants, to the HOA. The letter unequivocally stated that the destruction of her property was a criminal act. The accusations against her were defamatory, the fine was baseless, and that any further harassment or attempts to infringe upon her rights would be met with swift and severe legal action seeking substantial damages. Stephen Prentice received the letter from that fancy New York law firm and, rather than being intimidated, saw it as further proof of Lorraine's outsider agitation and attempts to bully the community with high-priced legal thugs. He read excerpts of it aloud at an emergency HOA board meeting held in his oversized, oppressively beige living room, his voice dripping with scorn. "See?" he declared to his nodding, equally prejudiced board members. "She's not just some harmless eccentric with bad taste in books. She's a troublemaker, a radical, trying to sue us for upholding our community standards. This just means we have to fight harder. We have to protect Willow Creek from these book-wielding anarchists." His fight harder strategy involved a campaign of escalating psychological warfare and petty tyranny. He instituted new, absurdly restrictive HOA rules, clearly targeted at Lorraine. Rule 78B, all exterior decorative installations, including but not limited to book-sharing receptacles, must receive prior written approval from the HOA Aesthetic Committee, chaired by Stephen Prentice, and must conform to a pre-approved palette of no less than 3, but no more than 4, shades of beige. Rule 79C, the public display or distribution of literature deemed potentially controversial, propagandistic, or not in keeping with established community values, as determined solely by the HOA president, is strictly prohibited and subject to immediate confiscation and fines. The online slander campaign also intensified. The HOA website now featured a community alert section with anonymous but clearly Stephen-authored posts warning residents about the dangers of unregulated information and the subversive elements attempting to infiltrate our peaceful neighborhood with their questionable ideologies. They posted distorted close-ups of some of the book titles that had been in Lorraine's library before the fire, a critically acclaimed novel exploring themes of racial injustice, a collection of feminist essays, a history of the civil rights movement, presenting them as proof of her radical agenda. The comments were even more vile. She's trying to brainwash our kids. This isn't a library, it's a recruitment center for radicals. Burn all her books and then run her out of town. Neighbors already cowed or converted by Stephen's rhetoric became more brazen in their hostility. The trash thrown into Lorraine's yard escalated from mere paper to rotting food scraps and even bags of dog waste. If she dared to sit on her own front porch with a book, someone would inevitably drive by and shout an insult, or turn up their car radio to blast offensive music. The original Little Free Library post, now a blackened, heartbreaking ruin, became a daily target for fresh acts of petty vandalism. Someone kicked it over, someone else spray-painted a crude caricature of a woman reading. Each incident was meticulously documented by Lorraine's discreet security cameras. Lorraine, amidst this siege, continued her life's work. She was, after all, Lorraine Banks, a name that graced the bestseller lists for months, sometimes years, at a time. She was also the newly elected president of the American Literary Association, a position of immense cultural influence. She was currently working on a new novel, a sweeping historical epic, but the constant harassment, the atmosphere of menace, made concentration incredibly difficult. Yet in a perverse way, the ignorance and hatred she was experiencing was also fueling a new, urgent fire within her, a non-fiction work about censorship, community, and the enduring power of words. The hints of her true identity, her towering stature in the literary world, continued to be comically, tragically missed or willfully ignored by Stephen and his informants, like the ever-vigilant Mrs. Gable. One morning, a sleek black limousine with diplomatic plates, a courtesy vehicle from the French embassy, arrived to take Lorraine to a cultural attaché's luncheon, where she was the guest of honor, discussing Franco-American literary exchange. Mrs. Gable, nearly collapsing her prized petunias in her haste to report, called Stephen. "Heads of state, Stephen! She's meeting with foreign spies. In a limo. They're probably smuggling those banned books in diplomatic pouches. This is an international incident unfolding right here in Willow Creek." Stephen, whose international experience extended to a package holiday in Cancun, gravely informed the HOA board that Miss Banks was now a suspected foreign agent. Another time, Lorraine was on a lengthy video conference call, visible through her study window. She was surrounded by stacks of books, her expression intense as she debated a point. This was a virtual meeting of the Pulitzer Prize fiction jury, of which she was the chair. Mrs. Gable, using binoculars, reported, "She's holed up in her bunker, surrounded by more of that propaganda, plotting with her radical friends on that giant screen. They were all shouting and waving their arms. It's a regular coven of subversives." Stephen used this evidence to further solidify his narrative of Lorraine as a dangerous, unhinged individual. Even a major feature article in the New York Times Sunday magazine, complete with a stunning portrait of Lorraine and discussing her upcoming novel and her new role as president of the ALA, failed to penetrate Stephen's wall of ignorance. A neighbor, a retired English professor, who, though intimidated by Stephen, still subscribed to the Times, nervously tried to show him the article. "Mr. Prentice," he'd stammered, "this Ms. Banks. It seems she's a rather significant author." Stephen had glanced at the photo, then at the headline, and scoffed. Propaganda. She probably paid them to print that. Best-selling author? President of some fancy club? Lies. All lies to make us look bad. Don't you be fooled by her tricks, Professor. She's a nobody, a troublemaker, and we are going to deal with her. The HOA's legal threats became daily missives. The fines had now, with an assortment of ludicrous new charges, environmental contamination from book ashes, failure to maintain a non-subversive yard, unauthorized intellectual activity visible from the street, climbed to an astronomical $50,000. Their lawyer, Barry Fineworth, emboldened by Stephen's certainty and his own lack of due diligence, sent a final bombastic demand letter, pay the $50,000 within 48 hours, publicly apologized to the HOA and the community of Willow Creek Estates for her offensive and disruptive behavior, and permanently remove all books and book-related structures from her property or face immediate legal action for foreclosure, defamation of the HOA for her lawyer's letter, and a restraining order preventing her from distributing any further written materials within a 5-mile radius of Willow Creek Estates. This was it, the absolute peak of their tyrannical absurdity. They were trying to ban her from books, from writing, from existing as a literary being in their presence. Lorraine read this latest demand, not with fear, but with a kind of weary, resolute calm. The time for quiet documentation was over. The time for the counter-offensive had arrived. She looked at her bookshelf, filled with first editions from authors who had fought their own battles for free expression. She thought of the children who would never get to pick a book from her little free library. She thought of the ashes in her yard. That evening, Stephen Prentice, feeling magnanimous in his impending victory, decided to make a grand gesture. He announced an HOA community bonfire and book drive for the upcoming weekend. Residents were encouraged to bring any unwanted or offensive books to be disposed of responsibly, i.e., burned, and he would personally oversee the final removal and decontamination of Lorraine Banks's property during the event, as she would surely have fled or been cowed into submission by then. He even had a sign made, "Celebrate community purity. Books in, trash out." Lorraine saw the flyer for this bonfire. A slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. A bonfire. How thematically appropriate. She picked up her phone and made a call to her publisher's CEO. "Eleanor, darling," she said, her voice like velvet laced with steel. "About that launch party for the new novel, I'm thinking of a slight change of venue for a pre-launch event. A little more grassroots. Yes, Willow Creek Estates. And perhaps you could also alert our friends at PEN America, the ACLU, the National Coalition Against Censorship, and, oh, just for good measure, about 20 or 30 national news outlets. Tell them a best-selling author, president of the American Literary Association, is about to host a rather illuminating discussion on freedom of speech, right in the heart of a neighborhood that seems to have forgotten its meaning. And yes, there might be a rather dramatic, book-related incident. They won't want to miss it." Stephen Prentice was planning a bonfire. Lorraine Banks was planning a 5-alarm literary and legal conflagration. The day of Stephen Prentice's community bonfire and book drive arrived with a grim, oppressive atmosphere hanging over Willow Creek Estates. Prentice, looking like a suburban Cromwell, ready to purge dissent, stood proudly beside a large, empty metal drum in Lorraine Banks's front yard, near the charred remains of her little free library. A pile of donated books, mostly old phone directories and outdated magazines, clearly not the offensive literature he'd railed against, sat nearby, a pathetic prop for his manufactured outrage. His most ardent HOA supporters, including a gleeful Mrs. Gable, were gathered, along with a few bewildered and intimidated residents. A couple of burly volunteers, hired hands more like, stood ready to forcibly remove Lorraine's bookshelf. "All right, folks," Prentice announced into his megaphone, his voice amplified with self-importance. "Today we cleanse Willow Creek Estates. Today we send a message that we will not tolerate cultural trash or subversive propaganda in our fine community. We will start by removing this altar of ignorance." He gestured dramatically at Lorraine's damaged little free library. "And then we will light a beacon of community purity." Just as his hired hand stepped towards the bookshelf, Lorraine Banks emerged from her house. She was not alone. Walking beside her, with an air of quiet gravitas, was Eleanor Vance, the distinguished CEO of one of the world's largest publishing houses. Julian Croft, Lorraine's fiercely loyal literary agent, known for his take-no-prisoners negotiation style, and Dr. Anya Sharma, the formidable current president of PEN America, the free speech advocacy organization. They looked like a delegation arriving for a high-stakes cultural summit, not a neighborhood dispute. Stephen Prentice stared, momentarily taken aback by this unexpected, sophisticated-looking entourage. "Well, well, Ms. Banks," he sneered, quickly recovering his bluster. "Brought some friends to watch your junk get hauled away? Or are they here to donate to our community enrichment bonfire?" He gestured toward the sad pile of magazines. Lorraine stepped forward, a single, beautifully bound book held in her hand. It was her latest novel, a critically acclaimed bestseller, currently dominating charts worldwide. "Mr. Prentice," she began, her voice calm, clear, and carrying an unmistakable authority that cut through his bluster. "Before you commit any further acts of vandalism, or indeed what could be construed as hate crimes and incitement, perhaps you should understand precisely who you are dealing with and what exactly you have already destroyed." She introduced Eleanor Vance, Julian Croft, and Dr. Sharma, each name and title landing like a small, perfectly placed explosive charge in the stunned silence that was beginning to fall over Prentice's supporters. "And as for me," Lorraine continued, holding up her novel so its cover, with her name emblazoned in gold, was clearly visible, "my name is Lorraine Banks. I am the author of this book, The Last Quill, and 12 other novels that have sold, collectively, over 50 million copies in more than 30 languages. I am a recipient of the National Book Award, a two-time Booker Prize finalist, and I currently have the honor of serving as the president of the American Literary Association." If Prentice's face had been smug before, it was now a ghastly mosaic of shock, disbelief, and dawning, abject terror. He stumbled back a step, his megaphone clattering to the ground. Mrs. Gable let out a small, strangled squeak. "The books you so gleefully had your associate set on fire in that little free library, Mr. Prentice," Lorraine's voice was like ice now, "were not cultural trash. They included a signed first edition of Toni Morrison's Beloved, a rare early collection of Langston Hughes poetry, and several Caldecott medal-winning children's books. Their collective insured value, quite apart from their immense cultural value, was in excess of $50,000. The act of burning books, sir," she paused, letting her words hang heavy in the air, "has a long, dark, and despicable history. It is the act of tyrants, of those who fear ideas, who seek to control thought by extinguishing knowledge." She then gestured toward the street. As if on cue, several unmarked cars pulled up, and a large contingent of people emerged, not HOA cronies, but a formidable assembly of serious-looking lawyers in sharp suits, accompanied by a swarm of reporters, photographers, and camera crews from the New York Times, the Associated Press, Reuters, The Guardian, NPR, and several major television networks. They had clearly been alerted and were ready. "Your campaign of harassment against me, Mr. Prentice," Lorraine stated, as her lead counsel, a renowned First Amendment attorney, stepped forward and began serving legal documents to the now ashen-faced, trembling HOA president and his stunned board members, "including the destruction of private property, the public slander, the incitement of hatred, and these ongoing attempts at censorship and intimidation, constitutes a catalog of serious legal offenses. Therefore, my legal representatives, on behalf of myself and in consultation with several national literary and civil liberties organizations, have today filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association and you personally for aggravated destruction of cultural property, defamation, violation of First Amendment rights, and intentional infliction of severe emotional distress." Prentice looked like he was about to be physically sick. He stared at the thick legal document in his shaking hand as if it were a venomous snake. But best-selling author? American literary? No, it's a trick. She's lying," he babbled, looking wildly around for support. But his former acolytes were either staring in horrified silence or trying to melt into the background. "She's a famous author?" one neighbor whispered to another, aghast. "Stephen Prentice burned a famous author's books? He's not just an idiot, he's a monster." Lorraine Banks addressed the assembled press, her voice ringing with quiet passion. "What happened here in Willow Creek Estates is not just an attack on one author or one little free library. It is an attack on the freedom to read, the freedom to think, the freedom to share ideas. When we allow ignorance and prejudice to dictate what books can be read, what ideas can be expressed, we diminish ourselves. We diminish our communities. We diminish our nation. Knowledge is not a threat. It is our greatest strength. Literature is not trash. It is the soul of our culture. She then looked directly at the cowering Prentice. You tried to start a bonfire of vanities, Mr. Prentice. Instead, you have ignited a beacon for free expression. Justice, sir, always writes the final and most indelible chapter. The legal and public implosion of Stephen Prentice and the Willow Creek Estates HOA was swift, brutal, and widely publicized. Prentice was personally ruined, facing potential criminal charges for incitement and destruction of property alongside the crushing civil judgment. The HOA was bankrupted by the $3 million settlement and court-ordered restitution for the destroyed literary works, and was promptly dissolved, its name forever a stain on the concept of community. The videos Prentice had so proudly posted were now Exhibit A in his own humiliation, viewed by over 50 million people globally, a viral testament to the perils of militant ignorance. Lorraine Banks, with the settlement funds and an outpouring of support from literary organizations and private donors worldwide, established the Banks Institute for Literary Freedom and Community Libraries. The Institute's mission: to fund and support little free libraries in underserved communities, to provide legal aid to authors and librarians facing censorship, and to champion the cause of free expression through education and advocacy. Her powerful nonfiction book, The Arsonists of Suburbia, a memoir of books, bigotry, and the battle for truth, detailing her ordeal, won the Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction and became an instant international bestseller. And, needless to say, any individual with a documented history of promoting censorship or engaging in acts of cultural vandalism was explicitly barred from any association with the Banks Institute. The final, uniquely fitting scene, several years later. A gaunt and broken Stephen Prentice, his former arrogance long extinguished, is working a mind-numbing, low-wage job in the cavernous, dusty returns and sorting warehouse of a massive online bookseller. He is surrounded by towering, teetering shelves piled high with books of every conceivable genre, a constant, overwhelming reminder of the world of knowledge he tried to destroy. He listlessly scans barcodes, his face a mask of weary resignation. On a small, crackling radio in the warehouse supervisor's office, a literary podcast is playing. Lorraine Banks's voice, eloquent and impassioned, fills the air. Every book we open is a door to another world, another perspective, another truth. To burn a book is to slam that door shut, not just for ourselves, but for all who might have found wisdom or solace within its pages. But ideas, Mr. Prentice, and here in the warehouse Stephen flinches as if struck, are more resilient than paper, more enduring than flames. They catch fire in the minds of readers. And those who try to build bonfires to consume knowledge will ultimately find themselves consumed by the ashes of their own ignorance. The camera pulls back from Prentice's miserable face, then soars over the beautiful, welcoming facade of the Banks Institute, where children are joyfully choosing books from a series of vibrant, little free libraries. An illuminated sign above the entrance glows warmly. The Banks Institute, Literary Justice. The imagined audience would be giving a standing ovation, a literary roar of approval. That's poetic justice, literally. He got booked for his crimes. The author always gets the last word,